They weren't young, they weren't fast, and they sure as hell weren't supposed to be dangerous. But these old men pulled off one of the greatest heists in British history. This is the unbelievable story of the Hatton Garden robbery. It started over a long holiday weekend in April 2015, when London's financial district fell quiet. Offices were closed, the streets were empty. Even the jewelry district of Hatton Garden, normally buzzing with traders, dealers, and diamond merchants, was asleep. But while the city rested, a small white van crept down the narrow street under the cover of darkness. Inside it sat 6 men, not your typical crew of criminals. There were no ski masks, no muscle-bound 20-year-olds. Instead, there were wrinkles, gray hair, and bad knees. The youngest was 57, the oldest 76. They called it their last job, their retirement plan, and in a way, their masterpiece. The leader was Brian Reader, 76 years old, known in the underworld as the Master. He had already served time for an armored car robbery in the 1980s and had spent most of his life inside the criminal circuit. But Reader wasn't just another thief. He was meticulous, patient, and smart. He'd spent months studying Hatton Garden Safe Deposit Ltd., an underground vault where London's richest jewelers kept their most precious assets. With him were his old comrades, Terry Perkins, 67, a diabetic who once had a heart attack but still loved the thrill. John Kenny Collins, 74, quiet and loyal. Danny Jones, 58, the engineer with a passion for drilling through concrete. And Carl Wood, 58, the driver and lookout. And then there was the mysterious man known only as Basil. Nobody knew his real name. Some believed he was a corrupt alarm engineer. Others thought he was an insider with access to the vault. Whoever he was, Basil was the key to everything. For months, they planned every detail. They rented lockups, bought tools, and tested drills. Danny Jones even practiced using the Hilti DD350 diamond core drill, a monstrous machine capable of cutting through reinforced concrete inside his home, making his neighbors think he was renovating. They studied the vault's layout, discovered the location of the elevator shaft, and learned that the building would be empty over the Easter holiday. That gave them 4 full days. April 2nd, Thursday night. The white van pulled up to Hatton Garden around 9:20 p.m. The men wore workman's clothes and reflective vests to look like maintenance workers. They entered through a side door with Basil leading the way. Somehow he managed to disable the alarm system, or so they thought. They took the lift down to the basement, carrying bags of tools, drills, and heavy equipment. In the quiet darkness, they faced the vault, a thick steel-reinforced wall protecting dozens of safe deposit boxes. Behind that wall, millions in cash, diamonds, and gold. Danny Jones started the drill. The Hilti machine screamed into the night, grinding through concrete as dust filled the air. The sound was deafening, but down there, no one could hear them. It took them hours to carve 3 holes through the wall, each wide enough for a man to crawl through. By 8 a.m., they were exhausted, covered in dust, and drenched in sweat. And then, disaster. The heavy cabinet on the other side blocked their way in. They couldn't reach the deposit boxes. Brian Reader, frustrated and paranoid, decided to call it off. "We'll come back tomorrow," he said. "Too risky now." They packed up and left, walking away like tired workmen finishing a shift. But Danny Jones refused to quit. The next day, he called the others. He said, "We're going back. We've come too far to walk away." Reader refused. He didn't want to risk another night. So Jones, Perkins, Collins, and Wood returned without him. Basil joined them once more, unlocking the door with his mysterious key. They went back into the basement and began again. This time, they made it through. Crawling through the hole, Jones found himself inside the vault, a treasure room filled with hundreds of metal boxes. He started smashing them open with crowbars and drills. One by one, the old men broke into the safes, stuffing bags with gold, cash, jewelry, and precious stones. The thrill was electric. These were men who had lived their lives chasing the impossible, and here they were, in their 70s, pulling off a multi-million-pound heist. They worked all night, pausing only to catch their breath or take pills for their hearts. "Get me a chair," Jones reportedly joked. "This pensioner's getting tired." When they finally left, it was dawn. They loaded the van with over 200 pounds of stolen goods, an estimated 14 million pounds worth. They disappeared into London's empty streets, their van blending in like nothing had happened. When the employees returned on Tuesday morning, the vault looked like a war zone. Dust, broken locks, and empty boxes everywhere. The thieves had hit 73 deposit boxes in total. The police were stunned. Who could have pulled this off? The early theory? A team of elite foreign criminals, maybe ex-military, maybe a professional gang. No one imagined it was a bunch of old men from the suburbs. But like every perfect crime, cracks began to show. The first mistake was the van. Collins had parked it in a street covered by CCTV. Hours of footage showed their movements, their faces, even their license plates. The police traced the van to one of their addresses. Then came the phone data. Calls between the gang members pinged off the same cell towers near the vault during the break-in. The ghosts had left footprints. Mothscard formed a special unit to investigate. Detectives worked around the clock, piecing together movements, faces, and connections. Slowly, the image of the Hatton Garden pensioners came into focus. 2 weeks later, the police placed the men under surveillance. They watched as Danny Jones and Terry Perkins met in pubs, boasting about the job. They even recorded them talking about the loot. Danny, unaware he was being monitored, bragged, "We're not just old geezers, we're legends now." By May, the police had gathered enough evidence. They moved in, arresting the gang at their homes. Officers found bags of jewelry, drills, and notes detailing their plans. One of them was even caught trying to sell gold bars to a local dealer. The only man missing, Basil. He vanished, completely off the grid. To this day, his true identity remains one of the great mysteries of the case. When the trial began, the courtroom was packed. The public couldn't believe it. 6 old men, looking more like a bingo club than a gang, sitting in the dock accused of Britain's biggest burglary. The press had the field day, calling them the bad grandpas, the diamond geezers, and Britain's oldest criminals. But the laughter faded when the evidence was laid out. The CCTV footage, the fingerprints, the recovered loot, the phone logs, the confession tapes. The jury took little time. Guilty. In 2016, Reeder, Perkins, Collins, and Jones were sentenced to prison, each receiving up to 7 years. Perkins, diabetic and frail, would later die behind bars. Jones would be found dead in his cell, too. Brian Reeder was released early due to his ill health. Carl Wood and others also served time. And Basil, who was later identified years later as Michael Seed, was finally caught in 2018 and sentenced to 10 years. Even after the arrests, much of the stolen loot was never found. Out of the 14 million pounds taken, less than half was ever recovered. Rumors spread that some of the gems were melted down, some sold overseas, and some buried in gardens across England. What fascinated the world wasn't just the scale of the crime, but who had done it. It wasn't the young, the desperate, or the reckless. It was men who had lived entire lives of crime, retired, and then decided to go out with one last blaze of glory. They planned it like professionals, but they made mistakes like old men, forgetting cameras, leaving fingerprints, and trusting the wrong people. Yet even so, they pulled off what police later called the largest burglary in English legal history. For Londoners, it became a legend, a story told in pubs and podcasts, the old boys who drilled the vault, a story of greed, nostalgia, and arrogance, of men who couldn't let go of the thrill, and perhaps most of all, a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous criminals are the ones you'd least suspect. Because in the end, it wasn't muscle or speed that made the Hatton Garden heist legendary. It was patience, experience, and a lifetime of crime behind wrinkles and walking sticks. As one detective later said in disbelief, "They were old enough to be my grandfather, but they robbed half of London." And somewhere in a dark corner of the city, someone still whispers,